Bienvenidos a todos. Welcome everyone to the 2020 LGBTQ Education Town Hall Community Care and Justice, a virtual town hall to discuss the pandemics of racism, COVID-19 on the LGBTQ community, and historic SCOTUS decision. I am Eladio Benson. I am a manager in the Human Civil Rights Department within the Center for Social Justice at the National Education Association. Thank you all for joining us. It is my honor and privilege to introduce the moderator for tonight's town hall, Imada Jones. Imada, whose work has won Emmy and Peabody Awards, is the creator of Translash Media, a cross-platform journalism, personal storytelling, and narrative project, which produces content to shift the current cultural hostility towards transgender people in the United States. In 2019, she chaired the first ever United Nations high-level meeting on gender diversity with over 600 participants. Imada's work as a host, on-air news analyst, and writer focuses on the full range of social justice and equity issues. Imada has been featured regularly in The Guardian, The Nation, MSNBC, CNBC, NPR, Mike, Color Lines, and is a frequent guest host of the In the Thick podcast. Imada has held economic policy posts in the Clinton White House and communications positions at Viacom. Imada holds degrees from the London School of Economics and Columbia. Imada is currently a Soros Equality Fellow and on the board of the Anti-Violence Project and the New Pride Agenda. She goes by the pronouns she, her. Everyone, please welcome Imada Jones.
Hi, Hilario, and thank you for that very nice introduction. I appreciate it and appreciate feeling welcome once again into the NEA family. Tonight, we're going to have a really important and essential discussion in this town hall about the impact of two simultaneous epidemics. One, of course, is COVID-19, which is apparent, and another is racism, which we see so clearly now in ways that are hard to ignore. And we're going to talk about the ways in which those impact LGBTQ students as well as educators. Of course, these two twin epidemics are occurring during the time of Pride and also Black Lives Matter. So we're going to talk about those intersections as well and all of the complexities that are at work. And we'll also receive a briefing and see as well where the intersections and the meanings are come in from the SCOTUS decision for LGBTQ employment equality that came in last week. So there is lots of ground to cover. And lots of things for us to talk about. I think we want this to be a discussion. So we're going to start out by asking each of our esteemed and learned panelists tonight for their views and insights on the complexities of the issues that I've just laid out. We're then going to move on to a more detailed briefing about the SCOTUS decision last week and what that might mean. We'll then move on to your questions and comments. So we hope that you will be thinking of those as we move through the program and ready for that discussion. I'm sure that with the incredible range of issues that we have to discuss tonight and the populations that they impact, that there will be lots of questions. And so I want to underscore that we really are encouraging those to be brought forward later so that we can have a vigorous discussion even further. Of course, we want to begin tonight, as these occasions always do, with a land acknowledgement. We want to acknowledge that we are on Native territory. We want to acknowledge these traditional lands that are served by the people upon which those who are participating in this call reside and work. We honor America's first people and all elders, past, present, and emerging, and we are called on to learn and share what we learn about the tribal history, culture, and contributions that have been suppressed in telling the story of this place we call America. So important to remember origins like that at this particular moment. So as I mentioned, we'll start out tonight with a question from each that I'll pose to each of the panelists, and they will respond in turn. Before that, I just want to give a brief overview of who is actually here tonight in this capacity and and what they represent, so you can understand how they'll be connecting to the conversation that we're having. Of course, there is Lily Eskelsen, who is the president of the NEA. Before, she told us we could call her Queen, so you can call her Queen if you want in your questions. Next, of course, is Alfonso David, who is president of the Human Rights Campaign. Next, there is Melanie Willingham Jaggers, who is Deputy Executive Director of GLSEN. And of course, Glenn McPuntai, who is the Executive Director of the National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We know that it is a busy time and a busy season for everyone, but these issues are incredibly important, so welcome. First, Lily, we'd like to start with you. And in the context of these complexities and these decisions that impact race and gender identity and sexual orientation, all occurring at the same time as a public health crisis and a landmark SCOTUS decision, we're wondering how the NEA is positioning itself at this moment through public education with respect to everything that is going on.
So I do appreciate the question, and I appreciate your Royal Highness too. That was right. I can't get any of my executive committee to go with that title to the bitter end. And this is big. This is so huge. And as the mother of a gay son who worries every day about his job in Salt Lake City, Utah, to have this moment, I mean, I've cried before over the Supreme Court. I cried when Neil Gorsuch was confirmed. I cried when Kavanaugh was confirmed. This time I actually cried for a good thing. And it was just so remarkable. You never know when the sun, the moon, and the stars are going to line up, and that this happened is just amazing. So yes, we are in the middle of this COVID battle. The economy is falling around our ears. It's all because of what's the technical term, idiot in the White House who is so ignorant of what's going on, and he's falling apart before our very eyes. And here we have this remarkable opportunity to actually advance justice. So for us at the NEA, we have focused on two words as the center of everything we do: for all. When we say for all students, for all families, for all the people, we the people, that we have to be ever more inclusive, because what we've seen is what happens when you have the wrong political leaders, the wrong spokespeople out there who say, for all does not include you. I don't like you. I'm excluding you. We actually mean it when we say for all. And so for all our NEA members, and there's a whole lot of them on this, I'm looking at the chat box here, and I'm seeing, friends and loved ones there. The next steps in this movement are to absolutely celebrate that this is not a victory for the LGBTQ community. This is a victory for all. All of us should be celebrating. If you're not LGBTQ, this is your victory, because it means that our community, our diversity is more respected. And so we're looking at, I know we're going to talk about actions later and what we want people to be focused on, but I could not be happier as a mom, as an aunt, as I'm thinking about everybody, as a grandmother. I'm looking at all of the people in my personal world who just got a lifeline thrown to them. And all of us are celebrating. So the next step is, how do we get everybody to understand this is their celebration and what they should be doing about it?
Right. And is there anything that you have, or any thoughts that you have as well, about how COVID impacts all of this? The battle for rights and recognition, the pressure that it's putting on budgets across the country, specific educational ones. Does that make it harder to respond in the way that you think is what we should be doing right now?
Well, and one of the things when you're dealing with any kind of health crisis, and here is the ultimate health crisis, again, we have someone in the White House that is trying to cut out health benefits from the trans community. And that's just where it begins. Instead of expanding, making sure that everyone will be able to take care of themselves should this horrible virus strike them or someone that we love. And so while you're still out there, Donald Trump out there trying to kick people off of the we the people, we now have one more brick in a different kind of wall, a wall of protection around our brothers and sisters and all of those in the LGBTQ community. And healthcare is something that we care deeply about. Again, back to that for all theme for us. And so for gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, for everybody that says, I deserve the same right as anyone else to be able to be healthy, this now gives us one more piece of the puzzle that says you deserve, you're worthy. And whether it's health benefits, education benefits, job benefits, it's all in there. And so we will be fighting to protect all for our entire community.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your thoughts, Lily. Alfonso, the Human Rights Campaign and the LGBTQ community is coming off of a huge historic win last week. But even amongst LGBTQ rights, there's still a tremendous amount of work to be done. Not all of us have rights equally, and our community clearly has had setbacks over the past 4 years in spite of this. And then at the same time, this is colliding or occurring at the same time as the fight for racial justice. So I'm wondering how you at HRC see is trying to maintain the momentum of understanding how much work there is to be done, both in terms of LGBTQ rights and race in light of the Supreme Court decision.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Amara. Really good to see you. Lily, thank you for your heartfelt words. As some people may know, the Human Rights Campaign is the largest LGBTQ civil rights organization in the world. So we engage in electoral work, we engage in policy, legislation, litigation, education, outreach. Our goal is to make sure that we achieve equality for LGBTQ people here in the United States and around the globe. And you're correct. Last week, the United States Supreme Court held that LGBTQ people are protected under federal civil rights laws. Now, that is a significant decision for LGBTQ people because what it means is that you cannot be fired from your job simply because of your sexual orientation or gender identity. But that is not the end of our struggle. We still have so much work to do. In 29 states in this country, there are no comprehensive protections for LGBTQ people. So what that means is if you are not protected in housing or public accommodations or credit or education, you can't really live openly and you can't be free. We are pushing for a piece of federal legislation called the Equality Act. And the Equality Act would provide comprehensive protections for every single person in this country. In employment, housing, public accommodations, credit, education. One example I often give to people, which is shocking, is if you got into an Uber or into a Lyft, going from school back home or going from work to an event, there are no federal laws that protect you from discrimination as an LGBTQ person. There are also no laws that protect you along the lines of race. That also applies in retail. So the Equality Act would not only fix that huge gap in federal law, and it would protect LGBTQ people as well as racial minorities. We're also looking at this entire development within the context of COVID-19. So COVID-19 is disproportionately impacting people of color as well as LGBTQ people. 1 out of 5 LGBTQ people live in poverty. 1 out of 5 LGBTQ people have not gone to see a doctor because they cannot afford one. More than 40% of LGBTQ people, and unfortunately disproportionately transgender, work in industries that have been disproportionately impacted. So we are looking at how we provide resources, support, and solutions to public policymakers as well as the public so they understand that when you create solutions to COVID-19, you have to be mindful of how those solutions are going to impact the community. And then finally, you mentioned race, which is something that we're all grappling with. As a Black man, I've had to grapple with all of my life. 400 years, this country has been struggling with the issue of race. And now finally, it appears that we are having an honest conversation about race in this country. And we have to think about how we can dismantle oppressive systems that were created to further oppress marginalized communities. So at the Human Rights Campaign, what I've done is make sure that the issue of racial justice is actually intricately intertwined in our mission, that we are advancing the rights of LGBTQ people as well as racial minorities, because our quest for liberation is one and of the same. So we recently got more than 350 organizations to sign a letter supporting transformative policing policies. And that is significant. We have more than 700 organizations that are now signing up to say that racial justice will not be just simply corollaries to their mission, but really core and central to their mission. So great Supreme Court decision, but we have a lot more work to do.
Yeah, I think it's really important the way in which you drew the connection between the three, in which they all impact marginalized communities in disproportionate ways, right? Employment discrimination, racism, and specifically COVID-19, and how they all work on each other to amplify. And so the need is to find these integrated approaches and solutions and commonalities to move forward. I think that's a really important point. So you mentioned the piece about focusing on police and police brutality and also general discrimination. Are there other next steps that you think that are important in order to keep pressing and to advance all of these issues? I mean, I'm wondering specifically beyond the political one, the policing one, if there are ideas that you had around the way that HRC is tackling race, or other next steps that you had that we didn't give you time to list in your first answer.
Yeah, so we are supporting legislation that is currently in Congress to reform policing. It is just the first step. There are 8 priorities that we identified as members of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights and Human Rights. And those priorities are, we're hoping, going to be reflected in the final piece of legislation. But again, after that legislation passes, we still need to do more work. We need to think about how we can invest more in community-based solutions as opposed to investing so much in policing. We need to make sure we stop predictive policing. We need to think about how we can make sure that law enforcement officers are actually held accountable for misconduct, and they are not going to be able to hide under qualified immunity. And we have to think about how we create those solutions not only through the legislature, but also at the ballot box. So the organization, or the Human Rights Campaign, does legislative work, policy work, but also electoral work. Mm-hmm. Our constitutional right to vote is one of the most important tools that we have to affect change. And when people think about voting this year, it is not only voting for the presidency, it is not only voting for Congress. We're also voting, in some cases, for mayors and city councils. And guess who decides the budgets for police departments, city councils? guess who actually appoints police chiefs, mayors? So we have an opportunity to really affect meaningful change using all of the tools in our toolbox.
That's true. Well, thank you so much for detailing all the work that everyone has to do. I think it's important. Just a reminder before we move on to our next question, we're sort of halfway through our panelists. So we know that many of you will have questions as you go along. So write them down so that when we ask for questions, that your question's right there and able to be funneled to get an answer to the question that you may have forgotten about by the time we get to the end of our exploration here with these experts. Next up, Melanie, as an organization that particularly focuses on youth and educating youth and providing resources to youth and educators, how have these three major challenges impacted kind of the content of your work and what you think is important for your organization to be doing right now?
Thanks for the question. Hi, everybody. So now more than ever, what is clear to us at GLSEN is that education has to be a site for liberation, right? What we're seeing in the wake of both the SCOTUS decision, the ongoing uprisings across the country, and the overdue and the growing effort to center Black trans folks in our overall fight for justice, safety, and inclusion is that this vision is even more possible now than ever before. GLSEN's work is to ensure the civil rights of LGBTQ plus students, to make sure they're honored in every state, every district, every school community, and every classroom. Because we know that the system won't work right until it works for any of us, until it works right for the most marginalized of us. So we also know that, this SCOTUS decision is a big deal, right? It's really important. But we also know that that legislation is but one part of liberation, and that the key piece of these protections really is about the lived experience of people feeling free, feeling included, feeling safe, feeling protected. And we can look at the Civil Rights Act almost 60 years later, right? We know the Civil Rights Act was passed, and yet Black people are still fighting to make the promise of full inclusion in our democracy a lived reality. So while the legislative approaches and our policy solves are really important, and we should not waver on them at all. We should absolutely push to victory. We have to also know that making sure that the lived experience of folks is also at the center. What I would also say is that, at GLSEN, what we are seeing is that COVID is laying bare a number of truths. We are seeing some amazing things. COVID has shown us that we can actually decenter our over-reliance on standardized tests, and the world won't fall apart, right? We know that we don't have to over-rely on these tests that are problematic and that both don't really reflect the true learning and ability of students, that also make the classroom too pointed, too high stress, and not focused enough on learning, right? The learning environment that's possible. We also see that actually, the social emotional health and well-being of every student really is the precondition for learning, and that we can't skimp on that, and we can't minimize it and put it to the side. And so for so many years, we've been pushed into a corner where standardized testing was really the only measure of success. Now we are seeing that the connection and the sense of belonging are absolutely prerequisites for learning. COVID is also laying bare the need for deep investments in our systems, right? That's counselors, it's educators, it's the entire educational ecosystem. And people in our communities are showing us that we can actually demand that our schools don't have police in them, right? We can demand that we can create safety without an over-reliance on the state. So now is the time to demonstrate the value of this approach. Now is the time. The opportunity is here in front of us. And we have to make sure that every young person, every student in our system has access to these benefits. But we also finally have to make sure that as counselors and psychologists and social workers, et cetera, are working to serve our students, that work is not tainted, that water is not poisoned by anti-Blackness and white supremacy, right? So again, this is a moment of great opportunity, great peril, great promise. And I think that we are in a position to really continue to push forward this vision of education as a site for liberation.
Yeah, it sounds like in many ways it's actually changing the way in which you see your work overall, right? By centering people who are historically marginalized, by doing a lot of work on focusing on the well-being of your students. Those are major shifts. Given the audience that is on this conversation, the educators, I'm wondering what you think is the importance and the role of educators in doing a lot of the work that you described against racism and the well-being of your children and a whole host of things that you just laid out.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing: is that educators are people too. Newsflash. I'm lucky enough during the spring semester to be an NEA member. I'm a member of NYSUT here in New York. That's NEA and AFT. And so what I know is that educators are whole human beings. We are entire people that come in and hold space for learning. And what is necessary for us is one, this protection, this ruling by the Supreme Court is major, right? There's a level of protection that is available to us now that wasn't before, and there's much farther to go, as Alfonso said a little bit earlier. But what is available to us is also what's required of us, right? We must come to this work in a spirit of learning, in a spirit of facilitation, in a spirit of holding, cultivating, and supporting each of the students who are in front of us. And we have to do our own work and demand from the systems in which we work that those systems are free of white supremacy, right? Are free of anti-Blackness. We are able to see and recognize the humanity of LGBTQ plus students, whatever age they are. So there's work for us to do as people, and there's work for us to do as holders of community. And I think that as an educator myself, I know that we're up for it. So I'm excited at this moment.
Well, thank you for that. The only thing I've learned about educators going to a few ed justice conferences is that no one knows how to have a good time like teachers. To be honest, it's the secret I never knew as a child in school if I had only known. But yeah, thank you for that, Melanie.
Thank you.
Glenn, I'm wondering what are some of the unique challenges posed by COVID and racism/police brutality and on the work that you do, and how you believe that this SCOTUS decision will impact queer, Asian, and Pacific Island people in the United States.
Thanks so much. And thank you to the NEA and Lily and Hilario and everyone for the tremendous work that you do. In addition to running the National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance, I also teach a class at Hunter College on Asian American queerness. Did you hear me? On Asian American queerness. And, you know, as an educator, the work that you all do as school personnel, forming young minds and supporting them to get through so much difficulty, I'm so appreciative for. I had a great opportunity to speak in one of your NEA's observances a few months ago, actually, and it was just tremendous. Thank you for all the work that you do to keep our community and our values safe. So, for Asian Americans, you know, it was a tremendous victory, and Cappy was so proud to have a brief in the Supreme Court with the task force and a number of organizations that highlighted the particular needs and issues facing the LGBTQ Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian Pacific Islander organization across the United States. One of the challenges that we find is that Asian Americans are the nation's fastest growing racial minority group. We are the largest segment of immigrants coming to the United States, and yet so often we're left out of these discussions. In the brief, we discovered that 1 in 3 Asian Americans in the United States live in a state in which they can be fired for who they are. And our work was to try to educate the community about these issues. And as Alfonso had said, we are so delighted that we cannot be fired on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and the decision will reach immigrants, H-1B holders, workers, but it does not include public accommodations, healthcare, education. There's still so much work that we do. And I'll put into the chat an action alert. I already see it around the Equality Act. The other thing that I wanted to share just real quickly is, we had 2 wins at the Supreme Court last week, the week before, whenever it was, is that it wasn't just the Equality Act, but it was DACA. So many talented young people. And we had a brief in the United States Supreme Court talking about the stories of LGBTQ dreamers, that they are building this country, that they are the ones, and that educators are the ones who are making America great again. And that is school personnel. We won that, and we blocked Trump from canceling DACA for now. But there's still so much work that we need to do to preserve our community's rights. As Alfonso said, we can't be fired now. Maybe we can't be deported now if you're a DACA recipient, but maybe later on. You can't be fired, but you can lose your health care. And how ridiculous is it that as states are opening up, workers can be there, but they may be sick, and that they cannot get the health care that this administration has pulled back. There is so much work that we need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many ways in which these issues always play out differently. I'm wondering what you think, what are the highest priorities that you have as an organization moving forward now that this ruling is in place, not only followed up on by DACA, 2 pretty substantial victories. What are the things that you're continuing to prioritize moving forward?
The elections, racism, immigrant rights. I mean, we still have so much to do. Come on. I mean, you know what I'm saying? We have to get counted in the census. Is that it is great that we can get married. It is great that we cannot be fired from a job. But we pursue something else besides legal equality. We are pursuing lived equality, where our communities as immigrants, where our allies are accepting us and centering us. And I'm so proud of my colleagues at HRC, at GLSEN, at NEA, who are centering the narratives of communities of color, because for so long we have not been able to raise the issues that matter for us. Sure, we have people of color, but we need to be fighting for the issues that meaningfully advance the rights and dignities of immigrants and people of color in America. And these organizations that are doing that. I am so proud of them. I am so proud of the NEA members, as the school personnel who are supporting young people. And at the end, I'll talk about some of the things that NEA and CAPI are doing. I'll put it in the chat so that we can continue this work together. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. I think that, that's really an important point that you made as well, which is that there is so much work to be done, right? This is not a time to believe that it's all over and to put our collective feet up, right? That it's still a very fragile moment, and we have to treat it as such, even as we celebrate these really important turns. So thank you for that. So we've spoken several times about, we've spoken several times throughout about the importance of the Supreme Court decision and what it, and the fact that it happened. And we've generally spoken about its implications, but there are some technicalities in the ruling that we think are extremely important for everyone to be aware of, and that impact your understanding and how to move forward. So that's why we're thrilled right now to have Eric Harrington, who is senior counsel at NEA, who will take us through some of those finer points.
Thank you, Amara, and thanks for inviting me to talk about this, and happy Pride. The Supreme Court's decision in Bostock versus Clayton County, in fact, comes nearly 5 years after the court's marriage equality decision. In fact, today is the 5th-year anniversary of Obergefell. And the Bostock decision recognizes that federal employment law protections apply to millions of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender workers across the country. It's a landmark decision, and it's one that I think is even more important than I think a lot of people recognize. Bostock was a trio of cases brought by 3 different LGBTQ employees who were fired for being LGBTQ. So Amy Stevens, she was fired from her funeral home when she announced her transition. Donald Zarda was fired from his skydiving job when a customer complained about his sexual orientation. And Gerald Bostock was fired from his county job in Georgia after the county learned that he had played on a gay softball team. I should note that neither Amy nor Don Zarda lived to see the day of the decision, but obviously their efforts will live on. Each of them sued under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And Title VII bars discrimination on the job because of sex, race, and other characteristics. These plaintiffs asserted that they experienced sex discrimination, and they argued that if an employer fires a man because he is attracted to another man, but does not fire a woman because she is attracted to a man, the employer is treating them differently because of sex. And the Supreme Court agreed. So too, the court explained that if the employer fires a worker for living openly as a woman because she was assigned the male sex at birth, but would not object if she had been assigned the female sex at birth, that too is unlawful discrimination because of sex under Title VII. As the court put it, and Justice Gorsuch, of all people, said it is impossible to discriminate against a person for being LGBTQ without discriminating against that individual based on sex. Now, the arguments that the Supreme Court adopted last week in Bostock were not new. And in fact, they have been tried in the early days of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. A couple of examples. In 1975, I guess, 45 years ago, Benny Smith brought suit under Title VII sex provision when his application for employment in Liberty Mutual Insurance's mailroom was rejected due to his, quote, affectionate or sexual preference for men. In that case, back in 1975, even then, the lower court acknowledged that a plaintiff could prove sex discrimination, and that court said in a technical sense, by making the comparator argument that the Supreme Court embraced in Bostock. Yet the court ultimately rejected it because it asserted that protections for gay plaintiffs would be too detrimental to recognize. About a decade later, the Seventh Circuit, which is the federal appeals court that covers Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin, considered a suit brought by Karen Ulane. She was a transgender airline pilot for Eastern Airlines who was fired after transitioning. In that case, the federal lower court recognized too, for the same reasons that the Supreme Court recognized last week, that she was subjected to sex discrimination. But again, the appeals court overturned the decision, asserting that LGBTQ people were simply outside and did not enjoy Title VII's coverage. So in short, it's clear, I want to make clear that courts kind of always understood that it was hard to logically distinguish LGBTQ discrimination from sex discrimination. But they simply concluded that LGBTQ people were not worthy of protection. So the Bostock decision recognized this inextricable link between sex discrimination and LGBTQ discrimination. And the dissenters, folks like Justice Alito, criticized the result. And they argued that the Supreme Court shouldn't adopt a broad, new, significant policy change unless Congress specifically told them to. And this is generally true. The Supreme Court is generally cautious to yield statutory interpretations that constitute significant policy changes. And there's a goofy legal maxim that captures this idea, and that's that Congress doesn't hide elephants in mouse holes. But as Justice Gorsuch put it, this elephant was never in a mouse hole. It was standing before us all along. So what changed? Why was the Supreme Court finally ready, and here I'm mixing my metaphors a little bit, to acknowledge the elephant in the room, that you can't describe LGBTQ discrimination without considering the sex of the person being discriminated against? And the answer is a lot of the things that we've already been talking about. You changed, we changed, and we changed our culture. The decades of lived equality, of activism, of being out, of having pride, those things changed our culture and allowed judges, even a conservative judge like Justice Gorsuch, to just finally recognize the plain meaning of the words in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So Bostock will forever change our workplaces. LGBTQ individuals can no longer be lawfully targeted and fired for being LGBTQ, period. This is a welcome and profound and way overdue development, and we should celebrate it. But I also think it's worth pausing to think of Benny Smith and Karen Ulane and everyone else who has faced employment discrimination. I, as a counsel for NEA, I think particularly of the hundreds of LGBTQ educators who were fired during Florida's purposeful campaign to remove all gay educators from schools in the 1950s and 60s. I think of the so-called Save Our Children movements that terrorized LGBTQ educators throughout the 70s and even into the 1990s, overt campaigns in California, Oklahoma, Oregon, Colorado, and elsewhere. I think of our LGBTQ students who witnessed these concerted and intentional discrimination campaigns against their educators, their teachers, teaching them that they were not worthy of equal respect and dignity and lived equality. And just in 2003, Justice Scalia dissented in Lawrence v. Texas in the decision that struck down laws that criminalized gay sex. And Scalia wrote, we should allow criminalizing gay sex. In fact, one of the reasons he said is because many Americans do not want, in his words, persons who openly engage in homosexual conduct to teach in their children's schools. And I also think of the trans teachers that I personally have worked with just in the past few years who have struggled with coming out of school because they feared, rightfully so in many cases, being fired and targeted by parents in the community. So this is a huge victory. It's a huge victory for LGBTQ educators, our students, and transgender and lesbian and gay and bisexual people across the country. But there's even more than the employment piece to celebrate, I think. Bostock's immediate effects on the workplace, they're huge, but they only preview, I think, the broader implications for the Bostock decision on LGBTQ people in the country as a whole. And this is why the decision, I think, and the lawyers who litigated Bostock have written well on this point, that it's an even bigger deal than many recognize. And here's why. The logic of the Bostock decision, that LGBTQ discrimination is necessarily sex discrimination, applies to a wide range of federal and state anti-discrimination laws covering far more than employment, including housing and credit and education, healthcare, and public accommodations. In short, LGBTQ people should now be protected, and these are going to be the next wave of lawsuits under federal law in nearly all phases of civil life. So virtually all the laws that outlaw sex discrimination at the federal and state level use terms similar to Title VII. So for example, one that's very important for us is Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, which protects our students and prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in any school that receives federal fund, which is virtually all of them. Courts expressly, including the Supreme Court, follow Title VII's interpretation when they interpret Title IX. So our LGBTQ students should now, finally, be protected from harassment and discrimination in school under federal law. And of course, the other nice little twist to this is that the Department of Education is ordered by Congress to enforce those Title IX rights. Now, rest assured, I am sure Betsy DeVos will try to drag her feet on this. And when we change administrations come January, there's a Department of Education that can just hit the ground running and enforcing Title IX rights for our LGBTQ students. The Fair Housing Act likewise bars discrimination in home sales and rentals because of sex. The Affordable Care Act, which applies to health care and health insurance, again borrows its definition of sex from Title IX. And the Equal Credit Opportunity Act protects borrowers from discriminatory crediting. So the idea is that the Supreme Court's recognition that it's impossible to discriminate on the basis of LGBTQ status without simultaneously discriminating based on sex should mean that all of these protections should apply to LGBTQ individuals. And so that means things like the Trump administration's efforts to deny transgender people protection under the Affordable Care Act. Folks litigating those cases, their position just got a lot stronger. And the implications extend beyond federal law. 45 states and the District of Columbia prohibit discrimination based on sex in a whole slew of areas, including public accommodations. And I know Alfonso mentioned this one: hotels, restaurants, retail stores, and other businesses open to the public. State courts will typically follow the Supreme Court's interpretation of statutes like Title VII and sex provisions. So those state courts should now also follow suit and recognize that LGBTQ discrimination is sex discrimination. And some states have already done this. They did it even before Bostock. That is, they recognize that their sex provisions prohibited LGBTQ discrimination. Now, obviously, there's much to celebrate, but to be clear, and many of the panelists have already talked about this, there are very important issues to remain, and more must be done. And the Bostock decision itself noted some. So the first big issue is that the court expressly reserved ruling on issues like bathrooms and locker rooms and access to school athletic programs, which are going to be very important to educators and our students. So courts and litigants will have to wait for another day to get clear final ruling on those issues. I think the transgender students who are asserting equal rights to access to programs and facilities are going to have stronger arguments, but the court expressly reserved those. Second, the court signaled that there are several religious exemptions to its LGBTQ ruling. Title VII itself allows religious employers to favor co-religionists. So, for example, a bookstore could argue that it has religious beliefs that are violated by an employee's conduct or status who's LGBTQ, and so they don't have to follow Title VII's other protections. That's a possibility that was specifically mentioned in the Bostock decision. The Supreme Court has already recognized a ministerial exemption. And full disclosure, before I came to NEA, I was an appellate lawyer at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and this was my case that was in the Supreme Court, EEOC versus Hosanna Tabor, where the Supreme Court recognized an exemption from religious institutions when they choose their ministers. So religious institutions can choose their religious leaders regardless of Title VII's protection. So when a church hires a minister, they can discriminate on the basis of race, sex, and disability. So that's another carve out. And in fact, there's a current decision or current case that's pending decision right now. It'll probably come out, could be Tuesday, could be in a couple of weeks, that will answer whether religious school teachers are ministers who are protected under federal employment law. And the other big hole that could be blown in the ruling that Justice Gorsuch wrote about is the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which prohibits federal laws from substantially burdening a person's exercise of religion. And religious employers, even vaguely religious employers like Hobby Lobby, will and may be able to argue that enforcing Title VII's LGBTQ protections burden their religion, and thus they should be free from those edicts and be able to discriminate lawfully. So there's some big caveats. The good news is that these religious exemptions, at least for purposes of educators and students, should have no purchase in our public schools. Public schools are not religious institutions under any definition, and they don't choose religious leaders. So at least within the four corners of school walls, all of these religious exemptions should not apply. There's also critical gaps in federal civil rights law broadly, and Alfonso actually mentioned a few of these. So federal law still does not prohibit sex discrimination in public accommodations like hotels, restaurants, movie theaters. Like they could right now discriminate on the basis of sex and by extension LGBTQ status when you're renting a hotel room, eating at a restaurant. In fact, the way that federal accommodations law is construed, businesses that are central to civic life, like bookstores and shopping centers, can turn away customers because they're a woman, because they're black, because they're trans, and federal law has nothing to say about that. And Alfonso talked about that. So the take-home story for that is that we really need to pass the Equality Act to address all of those gaps, to fill out the promise of the Bostock decision in education and everything else. And then finally, last point I think that's worth mentioning is that these recognitions of federal law are obviously vital. But and many of the panelists have already mentioned this. But we really have to continue to change our cultures, especially in our schools. So while the federal law provides protection, we have to make sure that the school districts actually comply with the federal law and that the other institutions of our life do. And to that end, NEA has produced model school board resolution that is about taking this Bostock decision and leveraging it to do even more, to promote LGBT equality in employment, in education, in curriculum, in training and inclusivity. It's a broad resolution that we encourage you to take, to use and encourage your school boards to pass it, that will help ensure compliance with the edicts of Bostock, but also can be used to stimulate a broader community conversation about inclusion and equality for educators, for parents, for students in the broader community. So big decision, great news. We have come far, but obviously we have much further to go. So thank you for letting me talk to you about this, and happy Pride.
Thank you so much, Eric. We just want to let everyone know that on Tuesday, June 30th, so next week, that there will be a town hall discussion where you will be able to dive so much deeper into the SCOTUS decision. And so please be on the lookout for those announcements and notices so that you can sign up and participate in that. So now we're going to move on to our Q&A portion of this particular conversation. As you all know, there was a call for people to submit questions in advance for people who may not have been able to be here or know that they would be shy about expressing their questions in the moment. So we're going to start with some of those questions, or actually probably just one of them, before we move on to your questions. So right now is the time to go back to the written question that I mentioned about a half an hour ago that you should write down, that you may have forgotten from the first half of our conversation, and to make sure that you tee those up. And please be prepared to ask those questions either in the chat or in person. We don't care, so that we can be sure to make sure that you all leave this conversation with the information that you need, feeling that your questions were answered. So, but first we're going to go to one of these questions that were sent in advance. And actually, this is for all of our panelists, Lily, Alfonso, Melanie, and Glenn. What can we do to make sure that LGBTQ students, Black and Brown students, and educators feel protected and safe when returning to school as we fight these pandemics?
I'll throw this in. We need to make every single educator in that school an ally. We need, we passed out beautiful posters for our dreamers of butterflies, and teachers would put those butterflies saying, you can come and talk to me, I'm a safe person. We need something, we need rainbow posters. We need something that we can give to every single educator. And we want every single educator to take the pledge. I put the link on there, but it is a pledge that's important to everyone. It just acknowledges that we all deserve the right to live, work, thrive, no matter our color, immigration status, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Together we commit to take action to address racism and discrimination, to achieve full equality, racial justice, gender justice. And together we celebrate pride in our LGBTQ communities and the strength and resilience that carries us forward to a stronger, more inclusive future. There's going to, everybody on this call would sign that, but use it to go to someone who might not sign it. There was a question I saw up there saying, I live in a really conservative area. What do I do? I'm not waiting for justice to happen overnight. Yes, we need the legal justice. Yes, we need the legal equality, but it's not a soft thing, the lived equality. And for my son in Utah, I dare you to find more conservative place there. When he and Mike got married, they invited all the Mormons, all the Catholics. They invited everybody. It's like, we're inviting everyone. If they're not comfortable, that they won't come. They all showed up. They all showed up going, I'm at a gay wedding. What's going on with me? But they love those boys, and they want them to be happy. So be out, be proud, be who you are, and invite people in. Start with your own family that you think are too conservative. They might be, but give them a chance. So while we're fighting on the legal front, we have to fight on the life front. And every teacher, every parent, every person should be approached and asked to be a friend to be an ally.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Actually, Alfonso, what would you have to say to that question?
I will say two things. One is I think it would be great if all educators led with empathy. I remember as a young kid struggling with my sexual orientation. My family, my parents were both very religious. And thinking about having, to Lily's point, an ally is something that's so crucial. So I would say leading with empathy and in some ways challenging yourself as educators to be more of an advocate than you may ordinarily think is appropriate. Because for young people, in so many cases, they don't have voices or they don't feel that they do. And if educators can lead with empathy and advocate for those young people who are struggling and are looking for a way out, that would be really fantastic. I think that's one of the most important things to do. I've been talking to a lot of businesses about how important it is as we talk about ERGs, which is a construct that operates more in the business world, for those leaders to become advocates. And I'm distinguishing between what we ordinarily think of as allies, which is a really great concept, but sometimes people disassociate allies from action. And, Lily was talking about how do we infuse action in this work? And that's why I want people to serve more as advocates.
Mm-hmm. Amazing, thank you. Melanie, I'm sure you have specific thoughts about this given who you all serve and what your mission is.
Surprise, GLSEN has got some resources on that. So we've got safe space kits in English and Spanish. We are interested and available to translate that into those kits into many more languages. I would say overall, right, the job of educators are to be kind of holders of school communities, right? So it is the job of folks who are educators to create safety, create affirmation, create opportunity for learning for these young people. And so this is a call in for all of us to be redoubled in our efforts and recommitted on that front. I would say that it would also be great for folks to know about our LGBTQ youth of color reports. We did reports on these are all separate reports on Black students, Latinx students, API students. We've partnered with NCAPIA on that, and Indigenous Native American students. I might be forgetting a group, and I apologize. So there's kind of a deep dive into the experiences of queer youth of color in schools, and so I would encourage folks who are looking to be allies and accomplices to these young people to study those reports and to see what the data shows us. One thing I'll just say, this is from our larger data set, is that we know that just one supportive educator can make the difference for a young person who is coming into an understanding of themselves around their LGBTQ identity. And so when we talk about making school safe, keeping young people in school, making sure that folks have access to that space, it really is one person. There should of course be more. Everyone should be supportive, but even just one person, one educator can make a difference to make school safe and available and accessible to young people. So we should do that. And then I would just say overall, right, what we're looking to do is make sure our systems and structures work for every young person. We're looking to make sure that our behaviors, our policies kind of move our behaviors in a way that make school accessible and safe for young people. And we can't leave hearts and minds behind. And we need to continue to change our culture. We need to continue to engage and not let people off the hook for seeing us as not different from them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And Glenn, you're an educator as well. So how do you think we go about creating protected and safe spaces for all of our students?
Read this. I was on mute. So NCAPIA was so proud to partner with GLSEN on the API study, and it's really fantastic. I also want to be so proud and appreciative of working with the NEA around 10 things that you should know about is school personnel, because not all of us are educators, right? Some of us are guidance counselors, bus drivers, to support LGBTAP community. So I'll put the chat in the link. Asian Americans are a dynamic and diverse group. We are not all alike. Um, and there are challenges and things that we're facing. I do not expect everyone to know everything. We are all learning, and we need to learn in the spirit of love. And so NEA has some love and some education, the National Education Association. So let's do that, and hopefully this will help. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we're now going to move to your questions, which we know and hope that you have. So please feel free to identify yourself or to put those in the chat so that we can, I'm playing with my phone as I talk to you, so that we can make sure to hear what you have to say. Go back to the chat. One question here is, how can we best support and continue to uplift our LGBTQIA+ students over the summer? Shannon Dyer, who posed this question, is worried about them, especially since schools have been closed and they haven't seen or had contact with educators in months.
I can jump in here. At the beginning of this pandemic, when schools went virtual, GLSEN also jumped into action. And some of the resources that will be sent out after this meeting, included there will be some GLSEN guides and resources around holding virtual space for young people, and continuing to, again, hold affirming spaces where when home might not be affirming and where school might have been these young people's respite and sense of safety. There are opportunities to continue to engage young people online. So we've got a lot of resources in that vein, and some of them we shared out after the town hall.
I guess this question is almost for any of you. What kind of legislation is being pushed right now to make sure that school districts are more inclusive of LGBTQ curriculum? Do we know of any?
Yes, there are several pieces of legislation. In fact, there's a federal piece of legislation that would protect LGBTQ students. We are also pushing state legislation to make sure we protect LGBTQ students and make sure that the curriculum is actually more inclusive. As Eric mentioned, there are many who oppose legislation in the education space for a variety of reasons that we think are really not legitimate. Nevertheless, we have a fair amount of opposition when we try to advance education-related legislation. Or there's legislation on bullying, there's legislation on conversion therapy, there's legislation on making sure we have inclusive spaces for people to learn. And we're fighting to make sure we advance all those pieces of legislation, both on the federal as well as the state level.
Thank you for that. Anyone else besides what Eric just mentioned to us? I don't know, Melanie, if you have any insights on that, or
I'll jump in real quick, just because as I heard the question, it was, what are school boards doing? Some of it is going to be legislation, some of it is, but this is a good place for allies and activists to go to a school board with a resolution. Find a school board member that is an ally, so that if they put it to a discussion in the school board, and school boards are meeting on Zoom calls now, there are more people who are actually tuning into a school board meeting.
Wow.
Might have been able to, leave work and go to, but a resolution that said exactly, Amara, what you just said. We want to be an inclusive place where LGBTQ characters in a play, in literature, in our history books, can be found, and to open that discussion, to have students and their parents willing to speak to something like that, so that you put it in front of the school board and it becomes something people become more and more comfortable talking about.
Amazing. Another question here, I think, Glenn, you may have some particular insights on this, and anyone else who does. How do we heal the relationship between the Black community and the APIA community? That was the question we just got.
Yeah, I saw that too, and I was nervous for it because this is a hard conversation. And we just had a conversation about this last week on a national call. And I want to be honest, it is a conversation because so often popular news media, politicians have driven a wedge between communities of color, and most pronounced between African Americans and Asian Americans, is that we are perceived as the group that breaks the curve. We are perceived as a group that are not real people of color because we all go to Harvard and Yale. In New York City, we're in the specialized institutions. And it erases our experiences as communities of color who do face discrimination and challenges. And there is a special relationship and obligation that we have to and with African Americans, because the laws of this country that protect Asian Americans on the basis of race were won on the backs and the lives of African Americans. Very few Asians were in those struggles early, but yet the African American community historically has fought for racial justice for which Asian Americans benefit. And we are honest with that history, we recognize that history. So I would actually encourage that this is an internal conversation within Asian American communities, and please reach out to me and anyone at the Incapia team if you want to have that conversation, because there are issues of claiming power and privilege, of knowing when we are in certain rooms, who is not also in that room, and our responsibility to open the door and not only to push others up, but to lift others up and pull them in. And so I don't have any tactics right now, but email me and I'm happy to talk with you more.
Great. There's a question here I think is really important that goes to materials that are available in pedagogy and how we use images and the materials that we have to actually shape students' understanding. And one person asked, so likely be our final question, that they teach fifth grade and they want to see LGBTQ characters in literature, that they want to see Black Americans portrayed in really positive lights, in informal reading. And they want to generally just try to see people generally othered as normal. And so they have questions about how that can be done, across the board.
Well, I'll weigh in if that's helpful. I think we all run organizations and institutions that have an ability to inform the public discourse and also inform how we see ourselves. And at the Human Rights Campaign, one of my main objectives is making sure that the images that we're using are images that are reflective of all parts of our community. I think that as we coordinate with businesses and other industries that are also involved in representation, is incumbent on us to make sure that we're calling on those businesses to also be more inclusive in their representation. And I know that GLSEN does that. I know that Glenn and his organization does that as well, in thinking about how do we use and leverage our power to try to inform how third parties are communicating about who we are and what we look like. All too often, those images don't reflect people of color, and they certainly don't reflect LGBTQ people. And we have to constantly think about how we can utilize our resources to make that change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really important. Yes.
I can throw in that NEA tries to sponsor reading events. Alfonso and I have read sitting on the floor with, they were like first or second graders, and we read I Am Jazz, and we read Julian is a Mermaid, and the kids talked about the stories. And there's some wonderful lists of books that are fun. They're fun books that, and even if you have an older group of kids where you're going, they're too old for a picture book like I Am Jazz. I had older kids read to younger kids. Let them be the teacher.
Wow.
And so you sit on the floor and you read the stories. And in every case, we had the cooperation of the school principal, the teachers. There were parents that brought their kids in. The parents were there. So I know there were some nasty little things out there in the social media about reading these horrible books. Parents thought they were great, and so did the kids. So do something with joy and do something fun and sit on the floor and read a story to kids and talk about it. What makes this one different? So that people get comfortable with this type of diversity. You might take some hits for it. It's okay. It's okay. You're doing the right thing.
And can I just mention something very briefly before we go on to the next speaker? I didn't say that we do have a program called Welcoming Schools at the Human Rights Campaign. We've been working with Lily and others to make sure that we're helping to inform curriculums all over the country. So we work with school districts and make sure that what they're teaching young people is actually inclusive. That's a really huge part of the work that we're doing. And I think it also helps to change the context and the construct that some people often operate in.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Alfonso. That was the point I was going to make, which is about inclusive curriculum. There's inclusive curriculum that's being implemented all over the country. New Jersey, I think, is going into implementation in this coming school year. GLSEN is helping to assess the kind of impact of this curriculum implementation in the coming year. So we've got great opportunities to make sure that there are age-appropriate resources as designated at the state level for all public education, and that is, I think, within our power, right, as advocates, and also I think in our responsibility.
I'm going to violate my own rule about last question because this one is really important, and it goes to something that you've all said. Many of you have encouraged people to be able to take action in their classroom by implementing new curriculum, by being broad about what they read and how they teach and who they include. But one person just asked, what do we do about the real reality that in many school districts, and some school districts across the country, there are actually prohibitions from moving outside of curricula that tell a broader story about historically marginalized people, that prevent certain stories and facts from being told about Black people, about Indigenous people, about LGBTQ people. What do we do about the reality that some teachers are actually restricted from moving into a broader and more inclusive curriculum?
So I'm the queen of everything at the NEA anyway, and you push back. You don't take no for an answer. You show up to the principal's office. These are the books I want to use. Oh, we can't use those. I'm going to use them anyway. Okay, well, you'll get fired. Really, I won't. And then ask them where you want the lights set up for all of the media that's going to come and make this a major story for the day. And smile while you're saying it, saying, well, see, I just can't let bigotry go. So can we bring the cameras in now, or would you like it to be somewhere else? Go to the school board meeting. By the way, go to your local association, your local union, and say, this is important to me. I'd like you to go to the school board with me and do this on behalf of our local affiliate. And just have this damn smile on your face the whole time. They will not know what to do with you. And bring parents with you. Bring allies with you. Bring politicians who are gay with you, saying, oh, so you don't think it's okay for the kids to know about me, really? It makes all the difference in the world. If you're an educator and you love kids and you go, I've got this great idea, my kids really need this to happen. and they say no, you go, okay, I have to go over your head. Where would that be? And just keep going until you get what your kids need.
Anyone else
Really,
want to chime in on that?
this
Yeah.
is clearly how Lily became the queen of everything, because she said much more nicely what I would add, which is that if you are not getting the answer you want and need from the people who are in power, you replace the people who are in power. At GLSEN, we are focused on both the classroom experience, the district experience, et cetera, and policies that shape our education across every level, from the classroom all the way up to the federal government. So really, it's about insisting that this system and the actors in the system are responsive to the needs of the young people. So at GLSEN, we have a 50-state strategy, right? We are looking to be in conversation with the education leaders in every single state to make sure, like I said at the top, right, that every state, every district, every school community, and every classroom gives the young people there access to education that is a site for liberation, not a site for erasure, not a site for marginalization, not a stop on their way to juvenile hall or prison, right? This really is a place where we are looking to make sure that our young people grow up to be free.
Amazing.
I'll just second what Lily said and what Melanie said. I think they said it very well. I don't need to take up more time. They're laid it out extremely well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. We're coming towards the end of our program. I just wanted to give each of you the opportunity to make a point or to say something that you felt that you did not have a chance to make, that you want to leave us with. There's no pressure to take this question, but I always think that it's important as we've had this conversation, if there's something additionally that's occurred to you that you think is really important for people to share, I think, we'd love to hear that.
So I'll just start by saying, be persistent, be loving, make it so that they simply cannot say no to you because you're saying, I love my kids and they need this, or I respect my colleagues, or this is who I am. And I know you'll support me. And when they don't, take them out in a nice way, but get someone else to sit in their seat and just keep going. It's how we got here. It's how we freaking got here, is that a whole lot of people said, I don't care how many people say no. I'm just going to keep going until I get some yeses.
I'll say two things. One, just thank you. I know that educators across this country are so responsible, and in fact the world, for young people understanding their capacity. So what you do is so incredibly important in getting young people to understand what they are capable of doing, because they face so many obstacles day in and day out. So thank you. And the second is a challenge to all of you to continue seeing beyond yourselves. Like, how can you see yourself in that young kid who is struggling to find their way out? And I know you try this, I know you do this, many of you, but I think as we go forward and as we face greater challenges, to Lily's point, keep on pushing back and saying no, and challenging the systems that unfortunately have been created in many cases to erase LGBTQ kids. It is as if they're not supposed to exist. And I hope that you can appreciate your role in making sure that you shine a bright light on them and tell them that they matter. Tell them that they actually have the value that we know that they do.
Amazing.
I'll jump in here with a thing you can do so that that supports both what Lily and Alfonso have said. And I would say that, one, we need to demand full funding for all public education. Two, the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, is using COVID as a cover to divert public funds to schools who discriminate. If you do not think that is right, none of us think that's right, let her know that. Reach out to her and tell her that she needs to not give our money to organizations and to schools that discriminate against our kids. And I would also say, take a minute to support your local education leaders who are calling for police to be out of schools. I think we can, again, create a site for liberation and safety for all of us.
Glenn?
All right. So in the mid 1980s, it was a guidance counselor, a bus driver, and a teacher. It sounds like a joke. Who saw a little kind of chubby, effeminate boy there who didn't know who he was and was really struggling with suicide, depression. And it was a guidance counselor, a bus driver named Jerry, and a teacher, Mr. Kaplan, who supported him and helped him not commit suicide, to go to college, and now to run a national LGBT organization. It is the work of educators and school personnel that saved my life, and you are saving so many other lives. Thank you all for building the NEA and for the work that you do. I am the result of the work that you all do. Oh my goodness, my mascara. I love you, Lily. My last word. Oh, you can't see it. Oh, that's terrible, but thank you.
Thank you so much. There is no better way to end this panel with a deep understanding of the impact that teachers can make on students who feel left out and left behind. That's the reason why we have this discussion, because in this moment, the combination of COVID, racism, police brutality, and continued discrimination against LGBTQ people all continue to have that impact on those students. And so it is incredibly fitting that we end with a tribute to the power of teachers. We wanted to make sure that you are on the lookout for an email from NEA. We love you too, Glenn. Thank you so much. That you are on an email from NEA on various resources for things that we spoke about today. There are also tons of resources, of course, in the group chat. We also wanted to remind everyone that next Tuesday on the 30th, there will be a deeper dive into the discussion around the SCOTUS. And I'm going to end this discussion with a shameless plug for my own work. This week, I released a new documentary called The Future of Trans, which explores what trans futures look like. It was featured yesterday in Teen Vogue, so it may be very relevant to you all and your work in terms of showing and portraying what futures may look like for trans and gender nonconforming people. You can find that at translash.org. It's super duper easy. It's 17 minutes. Feel free to watch it and to use it as a teaching tool. I think that it's really, really key and can be helpful and additive in so many of the issues that we spoke about tonight in shifting culture to make space for everybody. We want to thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you so much, of course, Queen Lily, Alfonso, Melanie, Glenn, Eric, and the entire NEA, CSJ, and Ed Justice team, which made this happen tonight. Thank you all so much. Happy Pride, happy weekend, and be hopeful. So many things for us to do and ways that we learned tonight that we can do them. Have a good evening.